Hey everybody, welcome to Beyond. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit like and subscribe so the algorithm can find the channel for others. And in our ongoing series with Roadmaps Resilience, we have none other than Burke Brown. Burke, welcome.
Hey, what's up, Ben? Here we are. Let's do this.
Yeah, man, glad to have you again. And today I want to talk about principles of inner wealth. And we've had some really good, different talks we focused on. But when we talk about inner wealth, which really will ultimately radiate to our outer wealth and who we really are and how we show up, kind of doing some work on the internal this week for sure. And I think the first principle I came across, I thought about inner wealth is really having an open mind that is attached to nothing, which is kind of what does that mean? Having an open mind that is attached to nothing, right? And no one knows enough in this world to be a pessimist, right? And I think a lot of times we glom onto things and all of a sudden it changes our focus, it changes our energy, it changes our direction. And the reality is we don't have half the information we need to make an informed decision. So I would argue that no one knows enough to be a pessimist about anything. And when we close our minds, we close off the potentiality that resides within all of us, right? And an open mind isn't one that finds fault in everything. It is one that's open to the ideas that anything is possible in our lives. And I would argue that also that most people spend their lives looking for the occasion to be offended. I mean, does that sound similar today, right? I mean, look at what's going on in this world. And there's a really tragic story of a woman that lost her life because she uttered some words. People got hyper offended and it cost her life. And I think we live in this hypersensitive culture today where they're actively seeking reasons to be offended. They're actively seeking reasons if they stake out a position to see what you say and then have a reaction to it. That certainly is, I would argue, helpful. And we know that there's language, customs, dress, politics, a mind that is, and again, a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing is never looking to be offended. So in your studies and your research, what have you come across as it pertains to the idea of being open yet attached to nothing?
Right. This is almost, it's Buddhist in nature, or I would say Taoist as well. It's ethereal to say don't be attached to anything, because obviously we're attached because we have to live and move and breathe in the world, right? I need to have a common language where it says a cup is this item here that holds a liquid. And so when I say, hey, can you give me that cup? Then they know, okay, I'm attached to the same belief and language of what a cup is so we can move in the world. However, there is a point where it becomes too much. The issue is when our identity becomes a thing, right? When we are attached to everything, when our tentacles are out and we consider that all these things are who we are, what it does is secretly empty us of our own value. And, in Buddhism, it says nirvana is when you reach the point of no more desire, because desire causes suffering. Because as soon as I want a thing that I don't have, the suffering ensues. And so it's this idea of just being so detached that you don't really need anything, therefore you don't suffer. Now, that's something difficult to have people, especially in the Western world, to come to reach that belief, that space of nirvana. And I myself think it's okay to have some desires. But truly, it's about saying that my happiness is predicated on it, that my joy or my disdain or my experiences emotionally, my experiences internally are defined by what you do, by what happens in the world. If I have a car and all of a sudden I feel more powerful, it's almost as though my identity has bled into the seats, into the steering wheel, into the gawking eyes of the people that are driving beside me. But what happens is if I feel bigger because of that, that shows how small I really am. And that attachment to that car, which gives me joy, if it got in an accident and I lost the car, I then would be ensued with pain, with suffering. And so the goal ultimately is to hold but don't grasp. That's kind of what I say. If you hold too tightly, when it's ripped from you or someone says what happens, you almost dislocate yourself. But if you just hold versus grasp, then you allow yourself to enjoy the toy, the idea, the world, the space that you're in, or you allow yourself to feel the insult, but it doesn't go deep. It doesn't attach to your identity, and it frees you from reacting in this emotional cascade of joy to happiness based on other people. The goal ultimately is to have so many identities. We've talked about this before. So many identities that you hold on to without grasping that if someone attacks it, it doesn't mean your whole identity is attacked. And that's really a form of freedom. It's whether people or situations occur, whether how you like them or how you don't, it's irrelevant to how your core self is. And ultimately, it's about building that core self, because that's where you gain the freedom.
Yeah, and I like what's going on today. And one of the things I argue to a lot of people is that when we're reactionary to an idea or a thought, we know that the most powerful force in the universe is our very thoughts themselves that can call into creation a lot of destructive things and maybe helpful things. But the idea that when you glom onto an idea or a movement, that you have the full range of facts that led up to the injustice, let's say, or that led up to the event, that's a fallacy, because I would argue maybe we have 0.00001% of all the facts that are available that surrounds a given issue. And I'm going to quote Emerson. This is a brilliant quote. He once said that the first thing we have to say respecting what are called new views, which I would argue is out there today, people
Mhm.
view a lot of things as new views, is that they are not new, right? But the very oldest of thoughts cast into the mold of these new times. And this is back in 1842. So when
Mm.
you look at revolutions, you look at communisms or all the isms,
Yeah.
and it's getting recycled again today at some level, or injustices that are getting recycled again today. And the youths of America and the people that aren't really evolved in their thinking or understanding or knowledge, because they just haven't had enough, time on this planet. It's not like their approach or their ideas are brand new. And this way, I kind of go back to being attached to nothing, because if we don't have all the facts, and we know these ideas aren't necessarily new, therein lies an opportunity to really go deep and try to understand dimensionally 360,
Mm.
really what's at the underpinnings of the injustices as we see them, or the things in society that just don't seem fair.
Yeah. That 360 view is really the key point that I pull out of that is when you have the freedom to not be so stuck on a specific idea. And it's okay to have passion and believe and push, for agendas that are important to you. I totally get that. But what is required to be able to step out of that idea, to step out of that perspective of existing? It gives you the freedom to stand from the eyes of another person, right? It gives you the freedom to see the perspective of other people. So when you're not attached, not only does it free you from pain and from the identity and from needing things to be a certain way, it also allows you to be able to see from other people's perspectives. And that's really, really important, because at the same time, there's this kind of, when we're, one of the works that I did was I was working with, millennials and as well as baby boomers, and how they were trying to mitigate their differences, right? And there was pros from the baby boomer generation because they've gone through it, they understand it, but they also got solidified in their ways of thinking. And the millennials, they had this belief that they could change everything and they can do everything, but they didn't understand work ethic, and they didn't understand kind of how to be seasoned through time. And so what happens is when you're able to look from all perspectives, not being attached to just yours, then you can see and understand and pull the best out of each idea. Because the truth is, there's a goodness or a value system that's visible within every idea, no matter how old school it is or how new school it could be. And it's, if we're able to be unattached, then we can tease out what's this person saying, how does it align with me, and is there a compromise or a space in which we can move forward as a community? Is there a compromise or a space where we can move forward? And this is as a coworker, right? Is there as a wife, as a husband? Is there a place as a society, as a family, or my own relationship with the events in the world as they are? Because otherwise, all there is disdain, and disdain is a poison that kills you no matter what, no matter where you're coming from. Is that if you can't let go and allow yourself to go into the core and understand, then you must suffer.
No, that's a great point, Burke. And I think, when you think about relationships, whatever side of the ledger you're on, it's about influence at some point. If a wife or a girlfriend wants a change in a relationship, the opportunity is to influence the other person to maybe consider it differently, or understand how that person's showing up. I always say that emotional intelligence is your ability to understand how the person experiences you. And that's a really tricky thing to understand, and really actively practice, right? Because we're kind of off our own egos and our own positions, and the world should be this way, and I was offended over here, and it was your fault. But the opportunity really lies in trying to understand how people experience our energy, our approach, and then understand how we can modify that. The idea that we're going to get people to transition the injustices we see in America today by brute force, by murder, it'll never happen, right? And I would argue that some of the greatest transitions that have taken place in every society, it started with an open mind, a mind that was not closed to make the progress we have today. It was an open mind that got us to the moon. It's an open mind that allowed, Elon Musk to land a rocket vertically, the first stage. In fact, Scott, I'm blanking on his name. He's one of the astronauts. And you probably know him because I know you follow NASA a lot. But one of the astronauts was talking about Elon Musk when he first claimed, I'm going to land a rocket, a first stage rocket vertically back on the launch pad. He thought he was crazy until he did it. And he goes, I'll never doubt Elon Musk again. And so the idea of having an open mind to the possibility, if there's injustice in this world or a relationship that's fractured, or you're trying to get an outcome with whoever you're working with, it really starts with an open mind to the possibilities. And it's ultimately about influence. And I would argue you can't influence people through brute force.
Right. You know, it's a truth. And I think that there's a yin and yang to that. We look at the Boston Tea Party. That was, we look at the Revolutionary War. We look at, all these experiences where it was the opposite, where it was insanity and it was brute and it was revolution. But what happens is the cost is so high at that level, right? And so being able to build an open mind is like, let's first come to the table. Let's everybody come to the table with their ideas and be open to that space. And when that happens, then all of a sudden you create change, but an internal revolution, right? And that's the goal at all times, is to have those internal, and I'm talking about internal revolution, even with my clients on a single individual basis, there is an internal revolution. Now, it may seem to them chaotic and that there are pieces of themselves that they're murdering, right? But there's this internal experience that happens. And when they come together and they realize, wow, myself, it's not what people believe about me that is who I am, it's what I am. And they have that revolution and they realize my idea of who I am is what's most important. That also happens with spouses, right? That also has to happen with the society as a whole, where everyone is having that internal revolution and everybody is willing to, just like you said, be open-minded. And open-mindedness isn't liberal. Open-mindedness is just, it's kindness. It's understanding that maybe there's a perspective that I don't see, that maybe that this person who's not willing to listen is not willing to listen because they feel that they're being attacked. Or maybe this person that is acting out in the way they are is because they have been attacked for so long. And so what happens is we start to see that the human nature is the human nature, that if we switched, snapped our fingers and lived our lives as someone else, there's an ease of likelihood of us reacting or responding the same way. Then when you do that, you can step out with that open mind and you can say, I'm going to assume that this idea is not insane. And I'm going to come from that space. And I always do this with my clients. I say, argue your opinion. And then they do it with such ease. And I go, now argue the counter opinion. One of the most difficult things to do, because you have to kind of have concessions in certain areas. You have to say, okay, well, that actually makes sense. But your ability to argue another person's point is proof of your true understanding. Because if you can't argue another person's point, then you truly haven't stepped to the space to see where they see and come from the values. Now, this is deep and difficult work, especially when everybody in the world is triggered, right? When we've been so used to and accustomed to a world that has kind of worked for us, then it becomes hard to do that. That's why, again, it goes back to the internal work. That's why the practice, the dojo, is between you and your wife, right? It's you and yourself. It's you and your coworker. It's you, and it always comes back to you. And once you practice there, then you can start to understand on a more societal level how you can be a part of the solution as opposed to a part of the problem.
That's right. And I think, again, one of the important strategies I've learned in life is you can have an ardent position, a strident position, a passionate position on something, but the idea of being attached nowhere and yet having an open mind that is detached, I think is critical, because if you then come back at me with an idea that I haven't considered, I'm open to the possibility. I'm open to the possibility of changing my position slightly. And I would argue in flying, we know that there's an axiom that 1 degree course correction in flying is the difference of make it to San Diego or somewhere over the Pacific. Same thing's true in our life. 1 degree course correction and understanding of a principle or a fact or an issue can make all the difference in the world. And I was reading this thing from Anthony DeMilo, and he goes, the greatest test of your relationship, spouse, etc., for non-attachment is the following. I'm not really attached to you at all. I'm merely deluding myself into the belief that without you, I will not be happy. I leave you free to be yourself, think your thoughts, follow your inclinations, behave in the ways that you decide are to your liking. And I think for a lot of people, that'd be, whoa, wait a minute.
Right.
I want certainty. I want some control. I want to know this person's predictable. But the idea of just being non-attached and letting them be, I think could be the most healthiest form of relationships.
It's when we realize that we are whole already, entirely ourselves as we are, then we won't expect another person to fill the void. When you expect a person to fill the void, you have put on them something that is impossible to do. What you're saying is it's important for them to fill their own void and fill your void. They don't have that many bricks That's not, they have to take care of themselves. And so I love Will Smith. He says that it's about a partnership. We're not husband and wife, we're life partners, right? It's about being a partner and understanding that we all have our own stories and journeys, and we're choosing to be together. We're choosing. One of my lyrics in one of my songs, there's a part where the singer is saying, "You are all I need." And she says, "Don't say those words to me. All we need is not to need and simply choose to love a thing." Because when you're at a place where you're just choosing love, then you have freedom. Because if you need love, then you've created codependency. You've created a sickness, a symbiotic relationship that must degrade. It's impossible for it not to, because each piece needs the other piece to do a certain thing, and it's impossible for that to happen. So the goal is to be able to look at a human being and saying, you are a whole being entirely to yourself, with your own dreams, own thoughts, own actions, own beliefs. And I am one as well. And I choose to engage on this journey with you and this partnership. And I always say that this is the goal in a relationship, is this or this. Both times they're going up. And that needs to be the number one goal, is that as I leave you or you leave me or we stay together, we are going up. All I care is that, because when we do that, that means that we are doing a service to each other. The relationships that I had that didn't work out, they still went up. We're still friends to this day because we are evolving beyond the ego. And that's what's so important. I heard a great quote in a relationship. He said, you can either be right or you can have a good relationship. You have to choose. Because if right is the most important thing, and this happens societally to individuals, if the right is the most important thing, you're right, then you will lose the relationship. But if you understand that you can set aside the idea of right to really administer to the relationship, then you can find out, and this is the next level, not find out who's right, but find out what's right. Because when you find out what's right, your ego isn't attached, and I won't be threatened if you fight against it. When we're putting ideas on the table, they say even in counseling, you have the husband and the wife, or the two couples facing towards the wall, and they act like the problem is on the wall. Because if they're facing each other, it's you versus me and you and identity. But if we're saying there's a problem that we're both experiencing and here it is on the wall, what's the right thing for us to do? And it doesn't matter who came up with it as long as it's the right thing. Why? Because you go up.
No, that's interesting, because you brought up a good person. That's Will Smith. We know we had that really uncomfortable interview with his
Right.
wife. He's had to practice open mind that's attached to nothing, attached to the ego, attached to the emotion of the betrayal. And I think one of the reasons we struggle in relationships is because we become attached and we tell ourselves, and you mentioned this, we tell ourselves, if this person behaves in a way that I find offensive, I can't be happy. So we ascribe a value we don't like. And if they trigger that or they act that way, we delude ourselves into thinking we can't possibly be happy. And it's almost like I'm dependent upon those people I love being what I think they should be. That's my dependency, right?
Right.
And so the idea of having a detachment that is an open mind where it can be open to everything, I would say is pretty critical, and is certainly attached to nothing. I think Will Smith maybe is a little different. We saw a lot of pain in his eyes and his heart and his soul. And that's a practice where he's really saying, what's the right thing to do here? I've been with this woman a long time. Things happen. And can I be the bigger person, the more magnanimous person? And that's, he sort of practiced something in a very public way.
Right.
I think a lot of people would struggle with. We all saw Jerry Springer, right?
Right.
We know what an unevolved mind looks like. We know what the monkey brain looks like
Right.
when tasked and given that kind of information. Some people react totally inappropriately, and some people can act in a classy way.
Man, such a great comparison. I mean, that was perfect. Really, and you saw the battle that he was going through, right? Everybody was there was so much body language conversation, and every person that I speak to was just like reading the body language, reading how they would move, how Jada would move, or how he'd look to the corner, or how she would hold her hand out. Everybody was talking about all that body language, but you saw that there was a massive amount of work happening underneath. And this is where the goal is to get to a place. It wasn't suppression. It was verbalizing, but also processing. And I really think that that is the goal of where we want to be as a society and where we want to be as individuals, where we can process and process with grace, right? And grace. Grace is in giving grace, but also be graceful, right? That's where the power is at, because it requires so much control. I think it was Socrates, or I believe it was Socrates, who said, anybody can be angry, but to be angry at the right degree, towards the right person, at the right time, for the right amount, this is difficult. And truly, this nuanced awareness is what's the most important thing for humans to be able to work on. How do I become nuanced and aware? How do I not just react? He had a perfect, the camera was on, it was a perfect Jerry Springer moment. But it was a conversation. And it was a conversation with an underlying value of loyalty. You could tell, because he was saying that no matter what you do, we're going to be in this till we're dead. That type of connection to his ideology and to his values, to the vision, freed him from having to say, oh, what's everybody going to think about this? I'm going to look like a punk if I don't. Da, da, da. All those stories just go out the window because you're so clear on who you are. And again, it comes back to those values. That's why, for me, all my work starts with your values, because once you know what you value, it'll help you choose what relationship you want to be in. And it'll help you realize that sometimes this person's value system isn't aligned with yours. That doesn't mean kick them out. Doesn't mean it must be a divorce. It means, how do I adjust while still nurturing my values and doing my best to nurture theirs?
I think he just blew up the humanistic narrative, did Will Smith. And, he sort of is like Jesus Christ or God, where it's about grace and forgiveness and understanding. Right. If you really want to influence people, he just demonstrated a way to influence people. I think he probably influenced Jada a little bit about what love is. For a lot of people, when they say I do, love is for better or better. There is no worse, because when it goes worse, they leave. Right? And that's why we have a 50% divorce rate. And what he's demonstrating is magnanimity, right? He's magnanimous. He's bigger. He's the bigger person. And hopefully that has a lot of people looking at that saying, interesting. Where did that come from in his character development? Where did that aspect? And, you listen to a lot of YouTubes from Will Smith. He's a really smart guy. He's a really smart guy in what it takes to be successful. So, the second principle of inner wealth that I came across was you can't give away what you don't have. And people will say, well, what? What does that mean? It sounds crazy, right? But, people who are not good at giving away love can't give away love because they don't have it, right? They don't have it to give away. So a person wants to go in a relationship and they're not filled with love, but they're filled with hate or animosity or bad experiences with the opposite sex. They're not in a place to go do that, right? And so the idea of you can't give away what you don't have, you have to be cognizant of that, right? So, for example, Berkey, I can say, I can't give you 10 computers unless I have the computers to give you, right?
Right.
It sounds easy, right? I'm going to give you 10 computers unless I have it. It's just empty rhetoric. And we hear this all the time in relationships, whether it be business or personal or whatever it may be. And I'd say the same is true of virtually anything in your life. If I say, hey, I'm going to trade this for that, and I don't have that to give, we shouldn't be surprised when the relationship doesn't work out. And how the person experiences us, right, the whole emotional intelligence piece of it, that's predominantly what we're giving off, right? And I would also argue that you can't give away love to others if you don't have, as I said before, love in you to give away. Yeah. If what you have is anger, prejudice, contempt, fear, these are the things you'll be giving away in those relationships. And I'm sure you see it in your work where people are trying to puzzle through, why am I stuck in bad relationships or, connecting with the same people or having this outcome? And again, to me, it goes back to that emotional intelligence to understand what you're giving out.
Right. Man.
That makes sense?
It absolutely does. Everything, comes back to cliches. Cliches have become so cliche because they're truths that have been repeated over and over again that it kind of loses its value. I feel my work is to find a cliche, break it open, and then speak the truths or articulate it in a way where people are like, oh, that's what it meant. And that's how I can relate it to my life again. What I believe is the problem is our definitions are improper. Our storytellers are improper too. You look at Disney and what it defines love as. You look at the movies and they're telling you what love is, and it's all emotion-based. It's all about the feeling. Right? It's all about this perfection, and they lived happily ever after. Okay, this is not life. And so when you give people that, then all of a sudden they have this false expectation. So I kind of imagine it's an apple versus a fake apple. People have been given fake apples. And then so what they try to do is give somebody else an apple. The person chews on it. It's fake. And then they throw it away. And so they're like, why did you throw away my love? You threw away my heart. The truth is they haven't even discovered what a real apple is.
That's
the
good.
Individual has not even understood what a real apple, what nutrients it gives you when you bite into it. They don't understand the juices. All they know is the shape of an apple. They don't even know the weight. They don't even know what a core is. They don't understand all of it. They just know what an apple looks like, but they can't tell the difference between a fake one and a real one. When I work with my clients, man, and when I work with just friends in general and people, this is something that's so common is their expectations are misguided because the definitions are improper. And so love becomes an emotion. But what you realize, one of my clients, I was working with her recently, and she was talking about how in relationships, no matter what, she's in these relationships, in friendships or even romantic relationships, she gives and gives and gives and gives and gives and then gets nothing in return. And she's wondering, I just want to be in good company. That's what she says. I just want to be in good company. Because I asked her, what do you want? And it was very difficult for her. And I just had to keep asking the questions until finally she could verbalize what she wants. She wants to be happy. And she said she wants to be in good company. And so we did a week of just her capturing her negative thoughts. And so what you do is you just submit what negative thoughts you have throughout the week and what it made you feel. Then we read through them in succession. And I said, what do you think about when you read that? And she goes, I'm awful to myself. And I said, let's throw away everybody you know. How's the company here? Is it good company or bad company? It's bad company. And the truth is, if you have bad company inside, how do you expect to love yourself to find good company outside? If the person who attacks you the most are your own thoughts and their toxicity is not in the relationships, it's inside, that means that you're saying it's so worthy of you that it's allowed to be inside your very being. And how in the world can you expect to find people that are going to give you the love that you can't give yourself? That's exactly what it is. So what's happened is her lack of loyalty towards herself is being replicated. People will only be and live out the blueprints that you give them. Remember when I told you the story of the warehouse where I put the table in the middle of the warehouse, left for a week, and then by the time I came back, it was filled?
Right.
Right? They fill it because it was there.
Yeah.
If your table is non-love towards yourself, then people will fill that table up with their own experiences towards you. It's you become and create and manifest and create blueprints for how others treat you. And until you learn to fill that void and love yourself, then you will be able to create boundaries. Because secretly, and this is the secret.
Well, it's funny you mentioned The Secret. That was a book that came out about.
Oh my gosh. I'll finish this thought real quick. Let me finish this thought real quick.
Please, please.
Yeah. The secret, and I want to go back because that really does tie to it in a lot of ways. There's a great talk where it talks about the hypothalamus and amino acids. But secretly what happens is we unconsciously enjoy the suffering. And so and we're attached to the suffering. The noble story of being the one who fights so hard for these relationships and never gets it. That story gives us this weird suffering nobility. And what has to happen is we have to detach, not only from the things that we think we need, but also detach from our suffering. Because when you can free yourself from your suffering, then you can make choices to say, I'm going to love myself and I'm going to take responsibility for every relationship around me. Then you can make the changes from that point. And that takes that detachment. All right, go ahead with the secret.
No, that was great. I appreciate that because I think we're walking with multiple stories in our cranium full of mush, right?
God,
we're walking with so many different stories from so many different people that we've never congealed to a story that fits us directly. And so you kind of, when you mentioned The Secret, there's that book, right, about the law of attraction. And I thought back to the Bible where it says, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, sending out that signal in the universe and it comes back. And I think a lot of times you get back from the universe what you put in the universe. So you're talking about a woman or a man who maybe isn't in tune with themselves, but they're giving off this energy, and then bam, it's coming back in ways that they say they don't want, but they're putting out that energy. And I would say that a lot of people think I'm not worthy to attract this amazing thing, that the universe will respond back with the same message. I mean, that's what's happening here, right? I keep attracting the same kind of people, losers and horrible events in my life. And I've heard this with many people. I can't attract abundance in my life. I'm forever going to be poor. I've been working my tail off in this career, doing this or setting these goals, but it always comes back to sort of poverty, right? And I'm wondering to these people, did it ever occur to you or to them that is the same energy that you're sending out to the universe? If you think those thoughts, that I'm a failure or I don't have abundance or I can't do this, that the universe is very responsive. It plays ping pong. I remember talking to my fiance the other day, and I used the analogy. I said, in a relationship, and we sometimes define our relationships this way, we think about the people that we have to reach out to. And you ever notice that there's people that you're the one always reaching out to?
Right.
And certainly when you reach out to them, they're happy to talk and they engage and they're friendly, but you're the one always initiating. I said, life's about tennis. Because ping pong, I could put the wall up and play by myself. Tennis was the analogy I used. And it's like tennis. You got to hit the ball. Someone's got to hit it back. You got to hit and so forth and so on, that in that dynamic relationship. But the same thing's true of the universe. As we go out there and we speak into it, it's playing tennis with us. Whatever we put out there, it's going to come right back, right?
Mm.
If I'm using the wrong equipment for tennis, I may not be as successful. If I don't have a small ball and a racket, maybe I have a soccer ball and a bigger racket,
Right, right,
the ball won't travel as fast. I maybe won't have as much control, right?
right.
But that's kind of the equivalent of what we're doing in the universe. We're throwing this stuff out there. And one analogy I'd use, and then I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is there's an ocean of abundance out there. I
Yeah.
can take four aircraft carriers, super carriers, and fill it full of water. And it doesn't impact the depth of the ocean. Or I can take an eyedropper and go in the ocean and pull out an eyedrop worth of value and abundance. The
Right.
choice is up to us. And I think the universe just gets back what we put in or pull out of it.
You know what, man? It's the truth. It is the truth. And it's so funny because, people be like, well, I don't believe in law of attraction. Da, da, da. It doesn't matter what you believe in, because you can, even on a psychological level, it's true. You self-sabotage, right? Let's say it's not the universe. Let's just say it's the way that you see the world. Your paradigm will determine your reality. It's as simple as that. The lens, if I put on rose-colored lenses, then I will see everything as red, different shades of red. It's just the way it works. And so as you speak these things out into existence, subconsciously what's happening is this. If I believe that I give and give and give, and nobody ever gives back. First off, these are very blanket statements. I give and give and give means I have done the noble thing and nobody ever gives back. Nobody ever. This is not a reality, right? If you're still alive, someone has given to some extent. So what happens is when you write that narrative, it becomes an identity. When it's attached to your identity, this is your survival. So if someone says that's not true, you're going against the identity of that person. So it's a threat. And so even someone who tries to get them to see on the bright side, it's a threat to that identity. And so the problem is when we identify with these things, we must look for evidences that prove that identity. I buy a green Honda, all of a sudden I'm going to see green Hondas everywhere. Even though I never saw them before, it didn't mean I manifested new green Hondas. My antenna saw them because I was focused on them. And my antenna will pick up what I think about. And if I think about that I give and I never receive, then you will look for those examples of it happening, and you will affirm and reaffirm that belief, which further pulls you into that reality. And to get out becomes that much harder because you have to almost break yourself to believe it. So law of attraction or just a psychological belief that inhibits you, they're both true. What you speak about, what you think about, what you identify as is what is reality.
Well said, man. And I think in this culture, it's not about give. It's not about giving away. It's about taking. So I think a lot of times we will go to the universe and say, "Give me, give me, give me."
Yeah.
What is universe response back to us? It says, "Give me, give me, give me." So now the universe is demanding from us, making us exhausted, I would say. And I think you'll always find yourself never arriving, but always in a state of striving. I got to be better, because you're really saying to the universe, this is what I want. I want the house. I want the car. I want the relationship. Give to me versus give away. And I think it's a feeling of never being enough. I guarantee in your practice, you come across people that are exhausted, burned out, right? And they feel like they always have to prove, they always have to strive. And when they go do that, they're just completely burned out. And they look at people that seemingly have it all together, have the goods, right? Looking good, feeling good, and having the goods. Right. And I think that there's a feeling that I'm never enough. It's just constant pressure to give back to get what you want from the universe. But what happens is the universe, if you sort of approach that way of give me, give me, give me, it's going to demand the same thing from you. And I think there's an opportunity, is kind of where I'm going with this, of a paradigm shift about how we use the energy of the universe in give and take.
Dude, every word has an inverse or inference that is opposite to it. If I say I want, I'm saying 1,000 other things at the same time. I want this equals I don't have this, right? That's what I'm saying. If I want a thing, I'm admitting it's not being in my life, right? So what happens is there's almost this cup that is forever empty because you want it to have it fill. The problem is most people live their lives with the cup. And so they want, and then it gets filled for a second, and then they want something else. And that's the only way that they think that they can exist. And so they're constantly not only saying that they want their cup filled, they're constantly saying their cup is empty.
Right.
You don't understand that there's an inversion, that you're inferring something else. And so your words of saying, I want love means I don't have love, which must include you loving yourself. It's that space. We don't understand that when we are claiming to desire a thing, to go after a thing, then we are saying it is not within us, which further pulls us from it. And so we identify as ourselves as the not having of it. I identify as the not having. By saying it's there, I'm saying my here-ness is wrong. How can you exist happily when your here-ness, which is the only thing that ever exists, is wrong? That means your presence, your current heartbeat is in the wrong realm. And this illusion of that thing over there is better. A, are you God? Do you know what is better in the future? And B, when the future becomes now, you'll be just as unhappy because you set the tone that here-ness is wrong. Sickness. It's a sickness.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. When I was growing up, we pray to God, right? And it'd always be, hey, God, give me X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Versus saying, God, I'm living in abundance. Thank you, and have an attitude of gratitude. Thank you for health, for the house, for the food, for the relationships, right? Different mindset. And I think the irony of what we're talking about is that if you shift and say to the universe, how can I serve, right? The universal response back to you will be, how can I serve you? The idea that we're always wanting and taking, and it's never enough. To your point, the cup is never full. And we think that bright, shiny object over here will be better for us at some level. I think there's an opportunity to sort of switch the paradigm up a little bit and say, listen, how can I serve? How can I really give as opposed to take, and say, give me X, Y, and Z in these relationships? I think probably a lot of people that you're sort of counseling and working with, they sort of come from a very centric, self-centric position, right? And I think a lot of angst in our environment and within ourselves is what we lack, because somehow we've deluded ourselves into thinking that if we have these things, these material goods, which is really the basis of communist China right now today, right? It's the man at the center of the spoke, not God. It's glorifying man, glorifying ourselves, humanism. Maybe it's a postmodern world kind of concept, but I think it's that paradigm that just creates a lot of anxiety and angst, where it's never enough. We're never happy enough, right? I think it's interesting that when you take the energy off of what you are demanding of the world, instead say, what can I give to the world? That's a big shift in energy, I would argue, right? I'm sure you've seen that in working with some of your clients.
Right. You know, what our process is, until we love ourselves, can our giving be right? And I say that doesn't mean wait until you're perfect to give. But what I'm saying is, if I've taught myself that a fake apple is an apple, then I'll be giving fake apples everywhere. I'm like, hey, let me help, right? Let me create a basket for all your fake apples, right? Let me give you a fake seed so that you can plant it. What happens is you start to serve improperly. And so when I start the work in the program, we start on the self, right? And we start on the first ecosystem environment that we need to give to is the one in creating alignment within ourselves. It's not the stories that the world has said about you. It's not the stories that you say the world is saying about you, because that's ultimately what we're following, our own projections of ourselves. But do the work on the inside, because then when you know what you are, your values, then you can set a vision for what you want to create in the world. When you find out what you want to create in the world, then you can set a mission that's realistic to achieve it. And so what happens is sometimes we find ourselves trying to just give, and we give in random areas, but we don't know if it's attached to our values. I've had clients who have gone and left the country just to find themselves, but they didn't know who they were. So they brought themselves with them. But then when they did the internal work to find themselves, then it wasn't a place that would help them find themselves. It was that they knew, they did the work, they faced. And then when they give from a place of purity. Hey, you think that's an apple, but it's just shaped like an apple. Here's what a good apple looks like. Take a bite. Okay, just one bite, because you have an apple inside of you. I want you to find that apple. And then when you're done eating it, then you can plant a seed and create an apple tree, and then give those seeds and apples to other people. It's this process of evolution that creates a prosperous existence. When you look at how a tree works, first thing it does when it hits the soil is it creates its own roots, and it pulls in the nutrients from the earth. Then it breaks out and follows the sun. That's the vision. As it sets its vision, it then becomes generous by creating more fruits that can be picked or are willingly picked. And if they're not picked, the apple will fall and die and create new seeds. You see, this is the process of prosperous existence. This is the process of us evolving. But we have to understand that we got to know what's first. Who am I? What am I? What do I care about? Roots. What am I following? The sun. Boom. What's my mission? To provide shelter, shadow, fruit, and new fruit. That's where the
Wow.
game is at, man.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, Brooke. I really like that. You know, what's
Yeah.
funny about the tree, the apple tree, and I think it underscores what you said, it knows who it is. And so I think the opportunity for us in life is as we're going through life trying to figure out who we are, where do we fit in this world, and when we're asked for things in the universe and we're not getting the response we want, I think it all starts back with what is our shape? What is
Mhm.
our fit? What is our purpose? What is
Right.
it we're here to do? An apple tree is here to produce apples. An orange tree is here to produce oranges. It's very clear in its mission. And I think once we get clear in that mission, we've done the internal work, then we go
Right.
out to the universe looking for to bless it, to be a servant to it, right? It's being able to take stock of what are our talents. In other words, are we an apple tree or an orange tree? What are you a great musician, or now you're a great mentor or a great thinker in your current line of work, right? So what is it that is your gift that
Hmm.
you're able to give away?
Dude, it's everything, man. Finding that is, and it doesn't take long. For me, it's average 6 months with my clients. 6 months to solidify it, 3 months to find it, 6 months to solidify it. That's kind of the average. Maybe 9 months if people are really trying to go further and deeper and farther and they want to evolve faster. But really, it's just taking a little bit of time from the array of everything that's going on, because people are just grabbing onto things to believe in, but just saying, I need to step back for a second. I need to step back for a second, and I really need to see what I'm about. And once I know what I'm about, then all of a sudden my internal antenna is going to say, bzz, that vibes, or that doesn't vibe. And then you can start to make choices based on your values rather than somebody's best case, because everybody's case sounds right until you hear the next person, right? If I'm the judge and the first person talks, I'm like, oh, that person's guilty. But then the other person talks, like, oh, that person's. So you have to know what is just in you first. And then from there, you can measure and decide what's a good relationship, what's a good work relationship. Should I go to that? Should I work at that job? Should I believe in this ideology? Should I? It's just I'm not stepping back, and I'm not making an opinion on other people. It's just me. The story is me. It's me in a house of mirrors. And if people are brave enough to be in that space, then they won't have anybody to be mad at, because them in the house of mirrors is this deep understanding of what every crevice of their body looks like. Then they can smash the mirrors, know who they are, and walk in the world without being pulled by a relationship, by an idea, by a job, by being swayed by money. All of that stuff becomes irrelevant.
Right. No, 100%. And it's well said. And I think when we think about inner wealth, which is almost maybe related to inner peace, I think the third principle I came across was get rid of resentments. We can do all the work in ourselves, and we can try to better ourselves and get the right perspective. But if we're burdened down by resentments, and what do I mean by that is carrying resentments about anything, whether it be a person that cheated on you, the person that stole from you, the parent that abandoned you. I've heard this great thing of that. There's certainly no accidental kids. There's accidental parents. We know that for fact. But
Right, right.
all the habits, hurts, and hangups that people have, and the resentments that grow, people that were abusive to you, and all the things that you've justified in your heart that give you the right to harbor this resentment. I think it's critical to really get rid of resentments if we want to spring forward and really be our true selves and live out the potential that God's put us on this planet for. And I would suggest that those resentments will always lead to despair. If we don't deal with them, eventually that'll burn its course, and then we're full of despair and anxiety and depression and hopelessness, right? And I would say, as an analogy, no one's ever died of a snake bite. If you think about it, you can't be unbitten. Once you're bit, you're bit. But no one's ever died of the snake bite. It is a venom that circulates through your system after the bite that'll end up destroying you. So this idea about resentment and holding this ill will towards an event is like venom in your body. And it's like my dad said to me one time, bitterness only destroys a container that contains it.
Mm,
And sometimes you got to forgive for your sake, not necessarily the other person's sake,
right.
but for your own sake.
Man, that analogy is perfect. Both of them, the snake and the container. You know, we have a limited amount of real estate, and that real estate is kind of our heart. And the question is, I'm very outcomes based. And this can frustrate people because I don't agree with everybody the way that they want to be agreed with. I can partially agree, but I'm very rarely do I fully agree with a certain person or idea. Um, because my question is, what is the outcome you desire? And if you want a happier life and you have limited real estate on your heart, if you give an acre to resentment, you are limiting the amount of peace that you're able to have. Now, that doesn't mean just rip it off and throw it away. It means work through it. Work through it. Understand that the goal, the outcome is to feel better. The outcome is your peace. The outcome is that you can become a better parent because you won't harbor it. It's that you can become a better citizen because you won't harbor it. And so what happens is go into it, not just cut it off, not just ignore it. Go into it and say, how do I get rid of this? Because the outcome I desire is peace. The outcome that I desire is a better life for me and those that I love. And so when you come in with an outcome base, it frees you up to know what your next move is. When I work with a client, if I'm about to do a speech, I have an outcomes and expectations survey, and it's very specific. One of the questions it asks is, what do you want the audience to feel as soon as it's over? What do you want them to say as soon as it's over? And what do you want them to do 2 weeks after it's done? Because I want it to last. I don't want them to think about what they want them to do immediately. What do you want them doing 2 weeks afterwards? They don't even think about these things. They just say, I want it to go well, and da-da-da. When they ask and answer those questions, I gain clarity and they gain clarity. And then when we talk about it, it becomes more crystallized. And so I all of a sudden know what I need to do to have that outcome. Outcome-based existence is one of the best ways to be, because what happens is you're not frozen in the ideas. You're just frozen in what the outcomes are. Now, of course, it doesn't mean, the ends justify the means. But what I'm saying is by having that clarity, I don't want to feel this pain in my heart, and I don't want it to bleed on other people. So let me find a way to find that peace. That is the freedom that you gain by understanding that what you want to feel, what you're hoping and aiming to be, what you want, what kind of peace you want to experience. It'll dictate what your next steps need to be.
Boy, that's powerful. Reminds me of the movie Mask with Jim Carrey. And I remember when it came out, it was a lot of fun to watch. And I was just a young pup at the time. And he put that mask on, and this wild, crazy person would come out. And I think it's sort of metaphorically speaking, apropos, because whether it's alcohol, you can see a different mask come on people, right? They get sad, they get happy, they get violent, they get a lot of things. Or you can see the person that maybe is carrying resentment that turned them into an epic bodybuilder, or they ended up becoming an epic, business person with a lot of money, and they're going to let people know they made it, right? We see that all the time in social media. I was here, and now I'm here, and you left me, and I turned into a doctor, or I set the course of my world on fire, and that's good, right? But there was a book written by Patanjali. He's a Hindu author and mystic. And he had an observation almost 2,000 years ago. He said, if you become steadfast in your abstentions of thoughts of harm directed towards others, all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in your presence, right? And this means no more blame. I'm not going to assign responsibility to others for where I am. And I would argue that when we do that, we take our own power away. If I'm locked in a place and time where this person hurt me, and as a result, I'm now going to become this person to prove I was worthy enough, you may get to that point and realize your ladder's against a fundamentally wrong wall. It wasn't your destiny to be there. But this event, because we're driven by animosity, resentment, whatever, took us in this direction. And guess what happens? We're more disillusioned. We're more bitter. We're more angry. We put all this time into this whatever, and it didn't give us the filling up of that empty hole in our heart, or it didn't fix that hurt, if you will, right? And if I think someone else caused it, I have to wait for someone else to change it, right? I'm giving them the power. And in order for me to get rid of it, I may have to wait for the rest of my life, because that person may never forgive it, right? Yeah. So there is the opportunity to really say, wait a minute, resentment, get rid of it, right? Because by the way, the person or the event that hurt and did the greatest damage to you, they probably don't even think about it.
Right. And you're thinking about it all the time.
Think about it.
Yeah, man. It's so funny that there's the danger in winning. And I don't think people realize that winning actually is one of the most dangerous things. If I get hurt by this person, and so I want to make sure that I'll get them back, and that's my drive for success. People are like, well, it worked. But yeah, but think about what mechanisms you had to create. Now that you've seen that somebody making you feel bad is what gets you to be successful, that means your next trigger has to be finding another war. You're constantly looking for wars to prove yourself.
That's a good one.
You're always chasing.
Yeah.
You're always chasing. So what happens is, even when I was personal training back in the day, one of the things that I had to be careful of, I have a client who comes in who's insecure, right? Let's say that their girlfriend just cheated on them. And I had this. They go, I want a six-pack. Give me a six-pack. I'm like, why do you want a six-pack? It's like, so I can get her back. And how is he going to get her back? By all of a sudden just being promiscuous with a bunch of women, taking advantage of other women. And I'm like, how is me building you up physically even worth it? It's a threat. I'm actually making you more voracious. I'm allowing you to take that insecurity and then flip it to totally exploit the insecurities of a bunch of women. I can't do that. So the goal is when you transition people, when they're making that transition, you want to help them realize, wait, it's not about going to what you don't have. It's about creating what you want, who you really are, and then you go up. But it takes so much. You have to be so delicate in that process, because what happens is if you give somebody power without knowledge, without wisdom, then they'll use it to be a detriment to society. So this person who must have a war all the time will create wars where there are none, because that's what they need to move.
That's your fuel, right?
And they think that they're winning. So their ego is totally happy, but in those moments of silence, there is sadness and destitution and wondering if this is all it's about. So it's tough because you have the outside world who's clapping for your ego, which makes it continue to grow strength, and your own spirit is dying to the point where the ego can swallow it entirely so that there's no dissonance.
Well said. You know what's funny? I was watching this social media app, and you'll see young, beautiful people pop up, and they're showing their sexuality and their hotness and their studliness and
Yeah.
virility, and they're amazing. And then you go about another decade, another 10 to 15 years,
Right.
those people, and they're destroyed, divorce, right? Disillusionment, disconnection, whatever you want to call it. It's just kind of funny. You can sort of see the evolution of choices, right? In relationships and where we pin our values onto. It's purely just the looks, right? And how they look in the house or the car. Boy, that can be really disappointing ultimately. I would say that ultimately there's no justified resentments. You're at a place where you're sending love in response to, hey, that's the place to be. Love is the highest level, I'd argue. So that if I go out and do something, it's because I'm doing it for the right reasons. And by the way, it talks about what we said last week. We talked about this offline, but the whole idea of mentorship, right?
Yeah.
It's so important who
Totally.
we let into our thinking and our mind and our space, our mental space, who those people are that are influencing us, and the idea of having enough wisdom to see where that person's coming from.
Right.
Are they a sociopath? Are they a psychopath? What's their intent, right? Are they a gaslighter? All those things have to come to play, because if I want to get into that clique and be cool and being accepted, it
Right.
could be to your own demise, your own detriment.
So real, man. It really is. And I think that's why, it always comes back to going in, doing the internal work, because that's what gives you clarity. When you go in, you know what's most important. I need a mentor. I don't need this person in my life. This is a toxic relationship. Wait, this isn't a toxic relationship. I'm toxic because I'm enabling them. Let me give them an opportunity to make a change. They changed. It was my fault. Oh, they didn't change. It's them. All right, I need to move, adjust. And so what happens is when you have that North Star, man, when you have that clarity, that Phoenician star that tells you this is north, then you always know that I have to just look up to reorient myself. That's it. That's what life becomes. It's about reorienting. So if you feel bad, you're like, I feel bad. And I just was talking to a client with this before our conversation today. She felt bad. There's something that happened and she felt bad. And I'm like, it's not bad that you felt bad. It's good that you felt bad, because the goodness is it tells you that your guidance system works. When you feel that bad, it's saying, hey, this is an alignment. I'm not being loyal to myself. And now that I'm not loyal to myself, what can I do to fix that? Because the outcome that I desire is to feel that loyalty. Why? Because I'm in flow. I'm efficient. I'm clear-headed. Everything I speak, I don't have dissonance because I know who I am. I want to get to that space because that's where I catalyze my success, versus I feel like I'm lying. I feel like I'm not truly who I think I am, or I'm confused, or I'm starting to go after attention. It's this ability to know your North Star and then gauge everything, weigh it, scale it all. You'll know what to do. You'll know to find a mentor. You'll know when to reach out and call that person. You know when to cut that relationship off. You know when you need to shut up. You know when it's your fault that you're mad at these people and it's actually your issue and your inability to face your own demons. You'll realize it all. But it takes bravery to do that work.
Tremendous courage. And I like that North Star because, flying a plane, the redundancy of direction and heading is a compass, a little simple compass that sits on the dash. That's a backup of a GPS in case that goes down. It's a magnetic compass to north. And the idea of having a magnetic the metaphor of having a compass in our life is really critical, because I would argue that as people influence you, and I would argue that in us internally, we know right from wrong. We know good from bad. And there's a point you can take your life to where you're dead to everything, where you have no feeling to anything. And that's a coping mechanism.
Right.
And I would argue that when people start making choices, call it sin, call it whatever you want, that is in defiance with who they are, that's disrespectful to who their being is, their energy, their spirit, their whatever, that is a heavy burden, a heavy toll on that person. So the idea is like, hey, you got to take a look at that. It's not a judgment statement. It's like, how does your spirit resonate with that event or that choice or that experience? And is it wholly in alignment with who you are? And if you don't know who you are, you don't have that true north compass, it's a bumpy ride. It's like flying through turbulence your whole life. And if you've been on a plane through turbulence, I mean, a plane can drop 500 feet in a second, right? And then go up 500 feet, drop 1,000 feet. That's turbulence. And I think we live our lives sometimes in a very turbulent state, because we're just not clear. And so I love what you had to say about the true North Star. And so the last principle I came across for inner wealth is really don't look back. What do I mean by that? It's really your personal history. Carlos Castaneda, an author, realized he did not need a personal history, and he felt it was just like drinking. I gave it up. And that has made all the difference in the world. How often are we tied to this story we tell ourselves, our history when we failed? Yeah, maybe you did in high school, but that's not the same person you are today as a 24, a 28, a 32-year-old, because every year you're developing capabilities. But somehow, for some reason, we're anchoring all of our lives and our abilities back in a failed relationship. Yes. Maybe back in a time that we really embarrassed ourselves, or we thought we lost the love of our families, right? And so the idea of not looking back, I think, is critical. Just like an alcoholic, to avoid drinking, you don't go to the bar. To avoid drinking, I don't hang out with people at parties that really are going to take me on that edge, right? So I think the benefit of giving up your personal history is that if you do not have a story, you don't have to live up to it, right? If I don't have a story that I'm telling myself, I don't have to live up to it, and I got a clean slate that I can move on to the future with.
Yeah, the stories are not reality. That's it. Because there's all that happens in life is truly just events. That's the only thing, events. What we tie as a thread through all of it, that's the story that we create. And so to be able to cut that story is to free yourself of the belief that I am my past. It's not true. You could literally recreate yourself entirely right now. Now, of course, there's genetics and things like that, but we have the freedom to be able to I could up and move to a different place, speak a different language, and never mention my history again and be a whole different person, right? That's the freedom that I have. In the same way as people are when we're kind of in this world right now where we're on social media, we can show up a totally different way than we normally would, right? If you have these people that are their names and identities are erased, then all of a sudden they show up as a different person, right? We can recreate ourselves no matter what. The truth is this: you have two options. One is cut the story and choose who you're going to be. Two is honor the story, but thread it differently. Writing a new story is what gives you the freedom to push into a new reality. Because if I look at my past and see these failures as the narrative of I am a failure or I am not enough, then I will continue to repeat that into my future. But if I look at it and say that these experiences are what taught me and gave me wisdom to be the person I am to make better choices in the future, then that narrative will tie me to a catalyst that moves me up in my life. And so what is so important is that we step back from the story and say, what do I want to author it to be? How do I want to author my story? Because the story that you authored before is not history. It is an opinion about events. Your job is to change the opinion about the events. Because if you can change the spin on your history, then it'll change your trajectory on how you live. This is where the power is. All we are meaning-making machines. We're script writers. Events are inert. It's not the glass half full. It's not the glass half empty. The truth is the glass is halfway. Now you get to make the opinion of it being half empty or half full. And when you create that opinion and look through that lens on your past, then you will catapult yourself into a very empowered state. That's what the goal is.
Yeah. Wow. Lot there, Birkin. I came across a thing from Wayne Dyer, and I thought it was pretty funny. I had a little levity to the conversation. He once said that all of us have bags of manure that we carry on our backs from our past, right? All the stuff that we use and bond to, we bond ourselves to the wounds of our past, the identity of ourselves on the basis of these wounds. And sometimes we set the bag down, open it up, and wipe it all over ourselves, wonder why our lives stink. I mean, literally, we immerse ourselves in this crazy past. And I think you mentioned it earlier, people sometimes tune into that frequency of hardship, of victimization, of, I've earned this lot in life because of my choices or whatever. And we're spreading all this manure on ourselves and wonder why we just stink.
Right.
We don't even like ourselves, right? And I think the opportunities, like you said, is really staying in the now and merging ourselves into this moment,
Right.
and giving up that personal history, sort of like being a fugitive on the run. They're, Lord knows, they're trying to give up that personal past history.
Right.
They're trying to make that new life, right?
Exactly. Try to
And
go
I
into
think
the
there's an
witness
opportunity,
protection. Yeah.
yeah, to pick up that, pick up from your past, embrace what it was, learn from it, like you said so well and eloquently, understand it, and then toss it, man. Move on.
Yep. That's and this is where the power's at, man. And that's what, when people realize that I can recreate myself right now, then all of a sudden the sky opens up. It actually tears open because the possibilities become endless. And it's a process. It's a process to let go of those stories, because secretly this victimization serves a purpose for us, because it's all we know to feel at least justified in our experience. But if we are able to write that different story and realize that we can create a new reality from this place, the amount of energy, when I say catapult, I mean literally, it will catapult you to a whole new level of existence. Your relationships will change. The choices you make will change. The way you see the world, the way you see your kids, the way you see everything. Your future mistakes won't be seen as mistakes, but opportunities to learn. It changes the whole narrative, which creates more real estate for joy, peace, happiness, grace, and all those things that are required to have the life that you desire.
Well, so it's funny. In closing here, I came across a book with Jocko Willink. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, called Extreme Ownership.
Mm.
And I have a military background. And one thing I like about the military is part of the training is all about failure. They bring you to the point of failure, whether it be pilot training as a Navy SEAL, whatever you're doing. They're helping you push your limits. They tear you down to build you up and to give you confidence in what you're really capable of, but extending it in an extreme way. And I think in that process, you learn that failure is part of it. And that's okay. Embrace it, because that's where you get the biggest lessons. When you're learning to fly a jet, you're not going to go on there like Tom Cruise, like a Hollywood actor, getting the jet from day one and be a rock star.
Right.
There's a lot of ugliness that's in that process. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of uncertainty. Will I make it? Can I make it? Right? But that's part of the process, is breaking you down, breaking down the ego, being able to really reflect, sort of like a mirror, saying, this is where you're really at as a pilot. These are the areas that you're good at. And these are the areas you really need to improve to be safe and efficient and effective as a pilot, whether you're a fighter pilot or a cargo pilot. But the idea of being comfortable with getting broken down and seeing the ugly, right? And seeing the not so pretty, and seeing the areas you need to work on from a military perspective. Now, there may be a lot of conscientious objectives out there, but from a military training perspective, it's really effective, because it takes a person that didn't have confidence, that has a lot of doubts, and fashions them into a warrior that has unlimited potential. And I'll do a plug for the world's first fighter pilot is an African-American woman. That is big time. That is huge. I mean, actually, she's the first African-American fighter pilot in the Air Force. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
Right? The limiting the beliefs, depending where she came from, but they fashioned this amazing woman into a powerful force, I'd argue.
And it's interesting because, just like any person that's in these, what you're talking about, this way that they're fashioned, what they teach is to detach from mistakes. Don't identify, right? When you look at it as just an event, you're detached. And it ties back to what we're talking about, this ability to detach. Because if I detach from my mistakes, then I'm not afraid of failure. And if I detach from my success, then I'm not afraid of failure, right? So it's this ability to just go with the flow that gives you the freedom to exist. I don't need anything to happen. I would like things to happen, and I'm working towards those outcomes, but I am not so tied to them that them happening or them not happening will steer my life and my joy. Nothing has that power except me. And that's the place we want to get people.
Well, I think about all the discussion we've had, Burke, and you're just a repository of knowledge and wealth and insight. That just didn't happen. That didn't happen overnight. That was an intentional journey. And I think a lot of times that if you look at CEOs of very successful people, they project. And what do they project? I'm here, you're here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm smarter because I'm here and you're here. And the reality is, for all those successful people, they're on a journey to do one thing, I would argue, to learn as much as they can, as quickly as they can, and radically drive their competence at the highest level possible. And if they hit into walls in a political structure with a big organization, they pivot and they move on. They start their own company. They do something different. They're not held back. But I would argue everybody out in the audience has that same potential. And the projection that you see with very successful people is just that. It's just projection. It's not reality. Hey, they're just like you or I. They put their pants on the same way. They put the dress on the same way. They eat food. They have the same issues. but they're projecting something that's not really reality. And what it does is it suppresses, I would argue, the talent and potential of others, because people look at it and they're like, oh, I can never do that.
Right.
There's no way I could. And that's not true. It's a
Absolutely.
process of being able to embrace failure and setback for the learning and the lesson. Therein lies the opportunity.
This is where the freedom is at, man. You know, as soon as you allow yourself to tell yourself that I can do anything, and this goes again to the cliche, but I've been looking at these lectures on human behavior and biology, and it is so thick. And my mind questions like, how can I just immediately verbally out loud say, I absolutely can absorb this and I will absorb this. And after saying it enough, it just comes in easily. We're all engaging in this process. We all have our insecurities. We all have our doubts. They're there. But I will not allow myself to believe that old story. It's not going to show up now. And if I hear it, I say, thanks for showing yourself because I know where to aim. Let me take you out. That's it. That's it. Hi, there you are. Now I know where you exist. So I'm going to keep on this and I'm going to do it until you disappear. And it's disappeared. This is the process. We are constantly evolving because we are not attached to the voice in our head and our fears of what we can and can't be. We just go, absorb, evolve, and push, man. This is the game that we play, and this is how I play it, at least, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, and you do it well, Burke. Hey, great conversation today. Another great session. Enjoyed the conversation, and certainly looking forward to next week as well.
Sounds good, Ben. Always good, brother.
All right, man. Take care.